Welcome to the What's Next Living Longer, Better, Smarter podcast. In this edition, the American Rescue Plan, what seniors, caregivers, and investors should know. This edition is made possible by LifeBio and MyHello, providing life story solutions for better health. I'm Fred Fishkin along with Mary Furlong. Hi, Mary.
Hi, Fred. Good to be here today.
Sure is. And with us are Bob Blancato, president of Matz, Blancato and Associates, a public and government relations firm. Bob spent 17 years on the staff of the U.S. House Select Committee on Aging. Thank you for joining us, Bob.
Thank you, Fred.
Also with us is Beth Sanders, the founder and CEO of LifeBio and author of Memory Journal, Life Story Journal, and more. Thank you, Beth.
Thank you, Fred, for having me.
And James Hamilton, CEO of VitalTech, a provider of remote healthcare solutions focusing on an aging population. We appreciate you being with us, James.
Thank you, Fred, for having me.
Well, with President Biden having signed the $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan last week, a lot of people are wondering, what will it mean for me? Well, there's been a lot of attention paid to the $1,400 checks and assistance for children and schools, but there's much more we should all know.
There's a lot we should all know. And I have to say that the people in this industry go way back together. And Bob, I first met when he was at the White House Conference on Aging. And he's been my go-to person in Washington for 25 years. So when I started getting calls from entrepreneurs saying, what are the implications of this legislation and what does it really mean for older adults, we reached out to Bob. So I'm thrilled to have you here and congratulations on all the work you did to make this possible.
Thank you very much, Mary, and Fred, nice to see you as well. And let me say what's in this bill for everybody is a stronger economy. This will be the catalyst, I believe, for many elements of economic growth that this country needs desperately, that eventually will impact all sectors. But as Fred pointed out, it's a $1.9 trillion total package, but it is many ways a bill that reflects the priorities of this administration in terms of addressing the pandemic from both the healthcare side and the economic side. And I'll run through some provisions that are both age specific, if you will, benefiting older adults, and some that are more general but include older adults. So, for example, Fred talked about the $1,400 stimulus checks, which will include older adults, and some of whom have gotten them already. Some people check their bank accounts right away on Saturday to make sure that they might have had them. But it's also important to know that in the vaccination area, which is very important right now for improving our economy, there's $20 billion for improving vaccine administration and testing, because we still know that 50% of people over the age of 65 have not yet received their first vaccine. And 1 in 6 older adults have tried but can't get appointments. So you've got issues around supply and rolling out the whole process that are being addressed in this bill. And just this morning, the president announced that they will be providing higher Medicare payments for more providers to do vaccines, but pay them more to administer the program. That should lead to an uptake in vaccine availability, and the job is to make sure older adults are included. The bill also provides $50 billion for testing and genomic sequencing of variants, and $10 billion more for personal protective equipment. And then also there's $25 billion in here to promote health equity, which is a major priority of this administration, including $7 billion for community health centers, which will especially help underserved older adults in this country. Almost 15 million people of all ages have lost their employer-based health insurance during the pandemic, which includes many of the younger old who don't qualify for Medicare. The American Rescue Plan will subsidize health insurance regardless of age for those who buy coverage through the exchanges under the Affordable Care Act. And a related benefit in the American Rescue Plan is the inclusion of language to pay COBRA benefits for workers of all ages who lose their jobs. And then, of course, there is a very important $12 billion add-on at the last minute to increase Medicaid support of home and community-based services, which, as you know, Mary, is what older adults prefer, is what their families prefer, and the way the industry is going, that is where the money's going. Okay, we're moving away from institutional care into home and community-based care. And then, older adults have been directly impacted by older workers have been directly impacted by the pandemic. Those 65 and over suffered a 20% job loss during the pandemic, and which is one of the highest rates of any age group in this country. And as you know, it takes them longer to get their jobs back or get new jobs. And they will now be included in the extension of the pandemic unemployment program, older workers, including the supplemental $300 per week benefit that will last now through September 6th of 2021. There's $10 billion provided for the state small business credit initiative to allow the growing number of older adults opening businesses to continue and hopefully expand in those businesses. The American Rescue Plan also provides $5.2 billion for disadvantaged farmers in this country, of whom 1/4 are Black, and their average age is 61. So there is a very important provision. There's $1 billion in here in emergency supplemental funding for the AmeriCorps and the Senior Corps program, which provides volunteers for many different programs. And of course, we have 5.4 million people over the age of 60 who participate in the SNAP program, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. They will receive a 15% increase in their benefits by virtue of the American Rescue Plan. In the housing section, we have $21.6 billion in emergency rental assistance, which will include older adult renters. There's another $5 billion in here to provide safe, socially distant housing and supportive services for people experiencing homelessness, which is a growing crisis for older adults. So the ones I just went through, they're not just age specific. These are sort of, as I say in a piece that's going to be published this week, this is the most age-friendly bill we've seen in some time. But when you go to programs that are specifically for older adults, the Older Americans Act is a prime example. $1.4 billion in new emergency money has been provided for the Older Americans Act by this law. $750 million of which goes to the nutrition programs, which were at one point both congregate nutrition and home delivered meals. At the moment, it's all home delivered meals, but we expect that to go back later to what it was originally. There's another almost $500 million for the supportive service program. And the important thing here is we have an aging network in this country that you know well that has been left out of the vaccine dissemination process. Even though they have transportation vehicles, they run the information and referral lines, the 211 numbers across the country. And now they have the ability to vaccine home delivered older adults with vaccines, but they're not given any support. This bill will provide over $200 million just for the aging network to be involved in vaccine dissemination. There's an additional $145 million for the Family Caregiver Support Program, which we all know has gained in tremendous importance because of the pandemic. And then I would also point out that there is $500 million to deal with nursing home strike teams to go in and look into facilities that are substandard, of which we've had way too many. And as yesterday's New York Times front page story pointed out, we've got a lot of issues to address in that area. There's $200 million being allocated for improving nursing home infection control. What has happened in nursing homes could have been prevented, should have been prevented, but now we've got to take steps to make sure it doesn't happen again. And then, of course, an area that I spent a lot of time on in the area as the national coordinator of the Elder Justice Coalition, this bill will provide an additional $276 million in funding for the Elder Justice Act for both adult protective services and the long-term care ombudsman program. And let me give you a second on why this is important. The adult protective services operate in all 50 states in this country. And, they're actually, their caseload is leveled because a lot of people are not calling in abuse cases because of the high grade of isolation right now. But what we do have happening affecting older adults are vaccine scams. I mean, real live vaccine scams, which are misleading older adults every day, even to the point of having them get on a phone, be told to go to a certain place where they'll be guaranteed to get a vaccine. They stand outside for 2 hours in the cold, get to the end of the line, there's no vaccine. These scams have got to be stopped. This funding will allow Adult Protective Services to go after those kinds of scams, raise awareness about any other kind of scam that could be initiated. And the ombudsman is very important because now that nursing homes are going to allow for visitation again on a gradual basis, the ombudsman serves as the protector. They're the ones who can investigate cases of abuse and report them in nursing homes. So as you can see, this is a massive bill required for the times that we're in. This is an emergency. Okay, we've seen almost $5 trillion allocated by the government to deal with this pandemic. It's been done because there's no other choice. The government has to step in times of crisis. I'm very proud of what this bill produces, and I'm very happy to be able to talk about it with you today.
Bob, there's a lot more we're going to be discussing, but first let's turn to our other guests. Beth, what are your thoughts about some of the benefits in the plan for older Americans?
You know, I'm particularly struck by how much this new legislation may help people stay in their own homes and get the kind of support they need to live as independently as possible, as long as possible. And I wonder how Bob feels about that too, if that's something that kind of makes you happy about what you see in this bill.
Absolutely. It continues the trend that we were going toward beforehand. I mean, you take the Medicaid program alone, all right? We have seen, the term used to be called rebalancing because way too much Medicaid money was put into institutional care where less than 5% of older adults live. Now, starting 3 years ago, we spend more on home and community-based care under Medicaid than we do for institutional care. That is a positive sign. But the consequence of it is, as you note, Beth, there's 750,000 people on a waiting list right now for home and community-based services. This extra money that's in this bill will help reduce that. President Biden has said he wants to eliminate those waiting lists in his first year in office. But the fact that there's a waiting list proves the demand, proves the appeal. And then, of course, the Older Americans Act has spent most of its time serving older adults in their homes and in the community.
Bob, I have a question. Do you see this as N4A and ASA and NCOA, and ARP, some of the organizations in leadership in aging will now have more resources to deploy?
Certainly, and I think the strength of the advocacy of these organizations is not what goes on in Washington. It's what goes on at the grassroots.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? If a member of Congress calls us, which they do on a regular basis, and ask us to take a picture for them of what's happening on the ground,
Mm-hmm.
and I get those calls both in the nutrition space and in the elder abuse space. I call our members and I say, tell me what's going on. I mean, back in March of last year, when the pandemic was just starting, and Congress wanted to pass an initial bill called the Families First Act, Congresswoman Rosa DeLauro, the powerful chair of the House Appropriations Committee, her staff calls up and said, Bob, get a read on the ground. What's happening? What's going to go on? So I did my part. My friend Ellie Hollander from Meals on Wheels America did her part. And they came back and told us this basic thing. We expect all our senior centers, all our congregate sites to close within a week. We have got to pivot and scurry and make sure these people don't lose their meals.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So we gave them that information. And of course, since I used to work on Capitol Hill, as you noted, I got a call from the staffer and said, okay, give me a number.
Yeah.
Right. Give me a number. So we scurried around and came up with a number, and that number ended up in the bill. And every dollar, by the way, of that $250 million that was passed back last March has been spent. Every dollar of the $500 million that went a little bit later for that same program has been spent. So it isn't like you're putting money into something you're not sure about the return on that investment. You are getting every dollar used for the right purpose.
Beth, I know you work with a telephone line, My Hello. What happens, this inability to get vaccines that Bob cited, how are we going to reach out to those that don't have the technology?
Well, we really do worry about rural areas and areas that have, and people that just don't have smartphones and things. So there's so many opportunities. My Hello, our loneliness intervention, could be useful in other ways too. We just know that people are going to hopefully be able to be at home, but they still are facing unprecedented levels of loneliness and isolation. And there could be ways that our automated phone system ways could be used to help people get these vaccines too. So there's potential here. We just have to understand what's going on and figure out how best as entrepreneurs to plug in and where can we be helpful.
James, why don't we bring you into this? Tell us about your perspective from VitalTech.
Yeah, so Fred, appreciate that. We saw the House Task Force pushing this, what they call the Older American Bill of Rights. There was kind of 4 key elements to it, right? As Bob alluded to, there's the financial element, retirement and security, community contribution, aging with dignity and respect, a bit subjective, but certainly very important. And then one that we're very focused on, which is access to affordable and comprehensive health care. And that has been candidly long overdue. We did see about 2 years ago, Medicare, CMS, Medicare unbundling the CPT codes and making remote patient monitoring and access for seniors much more appropriate from a healthcare professional standpoint, much more financially incented, and embracing that for seniors with chronic conditions. So for the ability to actually be predictive and preventative is really about technology and innovation. And if you think about this bill and potentially the financial resources behind this bill, our ability, the industry's ability to apply technology and innovation for aging in place initiatives, whether it's independent living, senior living, assisted living facilities, there's so much more that we can do in those areas for longer, healthier, productive lives for seniors.
How much red tape is there for a startup, for innovators like you to go through to make sure that what you offer can be covered?
It's a great question. It's less about the red tape, I think, than potentially the financial obstacles for the seniors themselves to be able to embrace and participate. So we think about it in 3 areas. We think about it in terms of engagement. How do you get the seniors to change their behavior, to feel like they can contribute, to feel like they can be compliant, and actually educate and motivate them to take their blood pressure, to take their blood pressure medicine, to think about their diet, to think about their exercise, to be able to manage the things that are physiological to them that will actually have a better outcome in terms of either a disease state or a chronic condition, right? That's one thing. So we're trying to do that with technology and innovation and provide a user interface that an 85 or a 90-year-old can utilize and actually see tangible benefits by working with their healthcare professionals and their family from a motivation standpoint to have better outcomes. The technology is there. It's really the adoption and embracing that. There's also the health and wellness and the cognitive elements as well. So it's not just about sort of the biometric or physiological data that we're trying to collect or others are trying to collect. It's also the social engagement that we're trying to embrace, and also the cognitive awareness and actually early detection of memory loss and other memory challenges, and engaging them and making them feel like there are people that have their similar interests, similar areas of activity, and actually making them participate from a social standpoint as well. Very important part of sort of their physical and mental wellness. And the last piece for us that's frankly long overdue is the one thing that's going to save the world. We all know that is artificial intelligence, but it's basic data analytics, and be able to look at a senior, look at their lifestyles, look at their activities of daily living, looking at all of their biometrics, looking at everything that they're doing, and actually have predictive and preventative better outcomes for those seniors based on the data. We can do that. It's there. It's just collecting it and then representing it in an actionable way and in an intelligent way to the caregiver, so they can do things in advance of early onset chronic conditions or worsening conditions, et cetera. There's so much more that we can do from a data standpoint that hasn't been embraced yet. And that's a big thing, I think, a part of this in terms of innovation that we can make a difference with.
So going back to Bob, talk about caregivers. And is this the first time we've seen caregivers in this legislation?
No, this is not the first time they've been included. The Older Americans Act Family Caregiver Program has gotten support in some of the earlier emergency bills, but I think the point that we all need to focus on, and I don't know where that's going to fit in, but the president is asking for a significant tax credit for family caregivers, really for caregiving across the lifespan, frankly, which, you know, in light of this bill, may be a little harder to do because it's going to take some time to get the tax code back up for review. But every dollar we invest in the family caregiver support program will help somebody be a better caregiver. And that's worth, you know, the small investment that we make in that program. We could do a lot more. And the other thing I would point out is that we can fully expect this is not the last of these bills that you're going to see. Because after we complete whatever is considered the end of this pandemic period, you're going to have a downstream thing affecting many, many, many areas that are going to require another separate intervention of some kind or another. But, you know, what Beth and James are doing is very smart in terms of both current stuff that's going on, like Beth with, you know, with having reassurance activities for the larger number of people who are finding themselves alone. And, you know, and James, you know, acknowledging innovation as an important. I mean, I think here's something that we have to think about in that space. We are awaiting, we thought it would be there by now, the Supreme Court's decision on the Affordable Care Act. You know, the latest Supreme Court decision. This is like the third one they've had to make. Most people think it'll be upheld. This administration thinks it's going to be upheld because they have put a very smart woman to run the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Innovation, which is the catalyst for the innovation in the healthcare space. The models that they're going to produce, how they're going to go about it, you know, and this is where your colleagues, Mary, you know, need to have a working relationship with that entity. The woman who's running is named Liz Fowler. She comes from both the healthcare background. She was a Capitol Hill person, very smart. But they've reinvested their energy into reviving the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid, for looking for new models, okay, of different kinds of care, delivery of care, identification of care, and so on. So I think that's going to be a parallel track. And the other thing I'll say in a predictive nature, I don't have artificial intelligence, James, but I'm going to give a perspective that I think is going to happen, which is I expect there will be, as you know, this bill was passed under a process called reconciliation, which means that you only need 51 votes or 50 votes in the Senate to get it passed. They're going to try a second version of that in the infrastructure space, okay? And I'm going to say, from my vantage point, the word infrastructure, you can drive a truck through it, not trying to have a pun, but if you're smart enough, you can make a lot of things infrastructure, okay? Building a system, building an infrastructure, whatever it may be. So that's also, they're going to try to do that by reconciliation. And, you know, I'd spend some time looking at what opportunities there might be in that space. But then after that, if the Democrats are really lucky, they're going to have a third reconciliation bill that will only be on healthcare. And that's probably an October thing, maybe a September, October thing. I can't, the predictive part is I don't know how long you can run this game before, you know, somebody blows a whistle and says enough is already, but they are in the pipeline to be considered. So let's see how it plays out.
If you look at this strictly through the point of view of a senior, someone 75 and older, because the boomers are now 75, right?
No, 76 is the oldest now.
76, okay. Right. What is the bottom line for them? Is it the vaccines that are going to extend their life? Is it the nursing homes which could operate better in skilled nursing communities? If I'm an older person listening to this podcast, how would you tell me? You told me the long list, but what do you think? What's the net in terms of improving my life or my mother's life?
Well, in my judgment, the essence is exactly what Beth and James were talking about. It's the ability to age in place, to age well, to have autonomy, to be able to make the right decisions, and to be able to be, if you want to remain productive, if you still have the ability to contribute, you know, form a business. There's a lot of people 50 and over doing business. You know, it's all about keeping that space, that open space. You want to avoid the flip side of it. You want to avoid the isolation. You want to avoid the institutionalization. You want to stay away from all those things that contribute to that. And so, when this is all said and done, there's a lot of re-examination. I just finished doing a session for your friends at the American Society on Aging for their leadership thing. And I said, don't use the word new normal. Use the word big reset, because that's what we got to do. We need to set up a big reset in a whole bunch of areas after this pandemic. But the one that I think will remain very strong is maintaining older adults in their homes, in their communities, in the best environment possible, both their physical environment, their mental environment, and their personal environment.
One of the things that's key to what Beth and James have been doing is the internet pipeline into the homes of seniors. Where are things today, and can they be improved maybe through the infrastructure bill you were talking about, Bob?
The answer is we have a lot more to do, okay? Because you can expand 144 new services for telehealth and telemedicine and get them reimbursed by Medicare, but if you can't have access to the telehealth, what good is it? Okay, so somewhere in this bill, I know there's a new commitment for broadband expansion in the American Rescue Plan, but the Federal Communication Commission has just announced about 2 weeks ago a $3.2 billion program to offer credits, to help lower income people get access to the internet. Okay, $50 credits, $75 credits, whatever it may be. There will be a huge amount of activity and infrastructure on the digital divide, because every United States senator represents a rural area, right? And that's where your problems are. So everybody has a vested interest in wanting to address that issue for at least some part of their constituency. And that's why the effective advocates know how to localize and humanize these issues down to why it's important for you to vote for this bill or take this lead. So I'm pretty confident you'll see activity in that space in the infrastructure.
Beth or James, do you want to chime in on that?
I'll say something about this. I feel like I love the big reset. I love this idea of purpose and meaning, and there's so much for people 75 and older, 65 and older to be doing. We love employing older workers. We found out they have special skills that we need at LifeBio, My Hello, and we've had this history of helping people tell their life stories. So recently we have older people and younger people that are paired to each other, and for the first time they're telling each other's story. And I just absolutely love the potential as everybody needs each other. We all know that, but how do you really make that happen? And how do you get them connected, whether it's with the internet, if it's with the phone? What are ways that we can do more together intergenerationally? If it's in the senior center space, there's just mobile meals, right? There's so many possibilities for us to unlock purpose and meaning and give people opportunities for more employment and to have them enjoy the entrepreneurship journey too. I think that's exciting stuff. So I guess I think there's so many, it's exciting times that we live in. So
James?
Yeah, COVID has been a catalyst, if there's any positive anywhere in it, for telehealth and the adoption of telehealth. And for us, and the way that we look at it, and I think the industry as well thinks about it now, telehealth is just a small potential sort of a fraction of the concept of either broader digital health or virtual care. So if that is the seed that allows seniors to age in place, right, to live longer, happier, healthy lives at home, but have access to healthcare in a much simpler way. One of the challenges we had, and it's exactly to Bob's comment earlier, was just infrastructure. So through a partnership with AT&T, we send a tablet, right? There's an engagement platform and an app for seniors, designed for seniors. And I've got a 80-year-old mother and an 80-year-old stepmother, and they both utilize the platform. So there's a simplicity and an element to it, but the connectivity challenges, right, that they had when they first received it. So by default, with our partnership with AT&T, we actually put a 4G module in the platform, and they don't have to connect to anything. By default, when they take it out of the box, it works. And everything that we provide in terms of of the biometrics and everything physiological. It's all Bluetooth enabled, and it's just one click. So it beeps you, take your blood pressure. It beeps you, take your medication. It beeps you to get on the weight scale. It reminds you, right, from a nutritional standpoint, that you went over your calorie count today. The goal is to have that big brother, that son or daughter that's not there, that's watching out for you, that's looking out for you, that's thinking about your health and wellness, but being able to do it, right, without physically having to be there with you. So all of those elements, as they start to come together, beginning with the ability to communicate, right, with that senior as they're independent, is becoming a priority, but it's also becoming a reality.
And how much of these services that you offer would be covered for a senior?
So a lot of it is either provided through a senior living facility, right? And that's part of the service that they're going to offer, because there's other elements that are involved in that, right? It's sort of your daily activities, it's your calendar, it's your events, it's everything that you would do in terms of social engagement, along with the medication and other reminders. What CMS is trying to do, running Medicaid and Medicare, and there's 40 plus million people on Medicare and another 20 on Medicare Advantage and 70 plus on Medicaid, this huge potential market, right, is to make it easier for the healthcare professional or the caregiver to get reimbursed financially to be able to have this sort of access to this information. And the barriers to entry 2 years ago were very high. They've done a significant amount of work in Congress with CMS to lower those barriers so that the financial incentive is there for the caregiver to provide better care and have better outcomes.
And in our case, we work with health plans who are able to provide services to people living in their homes. So that connection with health plans is very important, or in the world of senior living or nursing homes. Yes.
I had another thought that maybe, Bob, you want to address, and maybe everybody can chime in if they choose to. There's been so much attention when we talk about the rescue plan, so much emphasis on what's going to younger families, the children, et cetera, the checks that families are going to be receiving. I was thinking that perhaps that's also kind of a hidden benefit for older Americans, in that their children or grandchildren aren't going to be needing help the way so many do today if they're getting this extra funding.
Yeah, no, and in fact, when they calculate down the road how many people get lifted out of poverty as a result of this bill, the children will be leading that pack, because that's where the increase has been most pronounced. And the extension of the child care tax credit is one of the signature parts of this bill. The problem is with a lot of this bill is short-term in nature. A lot of things will expire in a year. So now the emphasis in Washington is to make this child tax care credit improvement more permanent. There you've got to bring up the always tricky word of tax increases to offset when you put credits out. But there were a few tax increases snuck into the American Rescue Plan that weren't really given that much attention, which probably, since no Republican voted for it anyway, they can't say they were responsible for it. So, but this is the two trends that you need to look for going forward relative to healthcare and policy. One is there will be more tax increases, and Medicare already started a number of years ago doing means testing. Now, means testing today means if you have means, you pay more. Okay. So people in a higher income brackets are paying more for Medicare than other people in lower income brackets. That same thing is going to happen and be expanded in Medicare reform, and will be also part of the future of Social Security. Because you can't overlook the fact that 10 million jobs have gone away in this pandemic, and 5.2 million new individuals went on Social Security in 2019. Well, if you're losing workers, you're losing a very important part of your revenue base. And if you're putting people on the rolls, they're drawing down benefits. So that is not a scenario that can go on much longer. So I would point out to your podcast folks that when the trustees report comes out this year for Social Security and Medicare, that's going to drop a big bomb in the center of Washington, because it's inevitable. It's going to say Medicare insolvency is going to happen much quicker. And so is Social Security's insolvency going to happen much quicker, which will force reforms to happen. Okay. And when they have reforms of that nature, they're in a package. And the job, if you're involved in this world, is to get yourself into that package. As long as you fit the criteria of what the bill is all about. So, Fred, I gave you a long answer to a short question, but they're somewhat connected, I think.
Well, a little follow-up. Once younger families start receiving this assistance, these checks for the children, isn't it hard politically for something to expire to say we're taking it away? I don't care which party you're in, once people are getting benefits.
Right. That is, Fred, you're absolutely right. And that is the hope of the Democrats approaching 2022, which is the next national election, which are the congressional elections in 2022. And if you remember, you are dealing with very thin margins in the House and the Senate. The Democrats control right now. So they're gambling on the fact of just what you talked about, that money going into the pockets, that money restoring these industries, putting people back to work. And even the fear of inflation, which crops up every once in a while in these conversations, is not the issue that people think it is. I mean, inflation is never really good, but inflation suggests an active economy. It suggests things are coming back in some degree. So I think right now, you're right. It's going to be very difficult to roll back some of the more important things.
We want to thank all of you, Bob, Beth, and James, for taking the time with us today. So much terrific information and much needed. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
And Fred, we will provide some resources for people to look to get more information about the bill, about learning about the benefits, and also about LifeBio and VitalTech.
Well, Mary, this has been such a long year for all of us. So many people lost, households upended. Hopefully, things will continue to improve now. More people will be vaccinated. There have been some bright spots, though, like your new granddaughter and
Absolutely.
the birth of this podcast, too.
Right. And how much we've learned. I was so excited to hear some of my classmates from college listening to our podcast. And I'm really thrilled that we could have these stakeholders here today. Bob, who has been working so hard on the legislation, along with so many more in Washington, to feel that it got done and that these, that hopefully there could be this reset. There could be this reigniting of the economy and supporting some of the dedicated entrepreneurs that we see that are innovating in the space. So I say spring in the air, Fred, at least this week I do.
And we love to see the rates coming down of COVID, and restaurants and other businesses getting a chance to make some money again, to stay in business, maybe rehire so many of the people who've lost their jobs.
And we do know that older adults that are starting businesses are among the most successful. And the average age is well into the 40s. But I was also happy to hear about the reform in skilled nursing communities. I was happy to hear about rural communities getting access. And of course, broadband legislation. This feels a little bit, I don't know what Reconstruction was like after the Civil War, but anytime there's a rebuilding, it inspires. And I like the kind of big thinking of this, and hopefully it will work, right?
Let's hope so. We want to remind our audience too that in addition to our regular podcast, you may be interested in the What's Next Business Longevity Academy. That begins April 20th, and you can find more info about that at maryfurlong.com. That's where you can find our podcast archive as well. Once again, we want to thank our guests, Bob, James, and Beth, and thank you as well to our sponsor, LifeBio and MyHello, providing life story solutions for better health. I'm Fred Fishkin with Mary Furlong. Thank you for listening or watching, and stay healthy.